I spent 40 years building concrete bridges, but I let the bridges of my own mind collapse out of pure pride. My name is Arthur. I am 76 years old, and I thought the silence of retirement was my reward, when in reality, it was my poison. I spent my life as a civil engineer, governed by logic and the strength of materials, believing that if I simply built a fortress of routine, I would be safe from the world. I chose a life of total quiet, thinking I had earned the right to stop learning and to stop struggling. I did not realize that the brain is not an archive to be locked away, but a tool that must be used until the very end. I was building a tomb instead of a sanctuary, and the fog began to roll in because I was the one who opened the door for it. But before we continue, I ask that you please help us bring this type of content to you by subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment with your thoughts. But before we continue, I ask that you please help us bring this type of content to you by subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment with your thoughts. I lived for 40 years by the rule of the straight line and the solid foundation. When I turned 60 and handed in my hard hat, I thought I had finally reached the shore. I convinced myself that the world was too loud and that I had earned the right to turn down the volume. I sat in this same leather chair day after day, believing that my routine was a shield. I woke up at exactly 7 and had my black coffee while staring at the same oak tree in the yard. I read the same section of the newspaper and ignored the rest because I told myself I already knew how the story ended. I felt a twisted sense of pride in my isolation. When my daughter Claire would call and offer to bring the grandchildren over, I would make excuses about needing my rest or having projects to finish. In truth, there were no projects. There was only the comfort of the void. I was living on autopilot, thinking that a mind at rest was a mind at peace. I treated my brain like a library that was finally closed for the season. I thought if I did not disturb the books, they would stay perfect on the shelves forever. I did not realize that pages rot when the air does not move. I looked at the new world with its gadgets and its fast talk, and I decided I did not need any of it. I told myself that learning was for the young and that my era of struggle was over. I was wrong. Every day that I chose the easy path and the same meal and the same 4 walls, I was digging a trench. I was making the world smaller and smaller until it was just the size of this room. I felt safe, but that safety was a lie. I was becoming a ghost in my own house before I was even dead. I watched the same news programs until I could predict the next words of the anchor, and I thought that meant I was wise. It did not mean I was wise. It meant I was stagnant. I was letting the gears of my consciousness grind to a halt because I was afraid of the friction of a new idea. I thought I was protecting my energy, but I was actually starving my soul. I bet you feel that same pull right now, that desire to just sit back and let the world pass you by because you are tired. You think you are resting, but you are actually fading. I did not see the rust forming on the edges of my memories because I was too busy polishing the surface of my pride. I thought I was the master of my own little kingdom of silence, but the silence was just the sound of my mind giving up on me. The day the lights started to flicker was not at some hospital or a doctor's office. It was 2 years ago in a church during my youngest grandson's baptism. The air was cold and smelled of old wood and beeswax. I was standing there in my best suit, feeling like the patriarch I always believed I was. My daughter Claire turned to me with a smile, her eyes bright with the importance of the moment. She asked me a simple question about the ceremony. I looked at her, and the world just stopped. I knew her. I knew the curve of her jaw and the way she used to hold my hand when she was 5 years old. But her name was gone. It was like a file had been ripped out of a cabinet and burned. For 5 long, agonizing minutes, I stared at my own flesh and blood, and I could not find the word to call her. I watched the smile on her face slowly wither. I saw the moment her joy turned into a sharp, cold panic. She did not say anything, but her eyes told me everything. She saw the vacancy in me. She saw the man she leaned on for 40 years suddenly become a hollow shell. I felt a shame so deep it made my stomach turn. I went home that afternoon, and I did not tell a soul. I sat at my table and pulled out an old 500-piece jigsaw puzzle of a mountain lake. I used to finish these in an hour while listening to the radio. I sat there for 3 hours, staring at the cardboard shapes. My hands were trembling, and the colors did not make sense anymore. I could not connect the pieces. I could not find the logic. That was the moment I realized my fortress of silence was actually a prison. The bridges were not just collapsing, they were already gone, and I was standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the fog take everything I ever loved. I realized then that while I was busy pretending to be at peace, the rust had finished eating the gears of my life. I was 74 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was truly terrified of my own mind. I did not run for help after that day at the church. My engineer's brain told me that every problem has a structural solution if you just tighten the bolts and work harder. I believed my pride was a foundation when it was actually the weight that was dragging me down. I thought if I stayed inside these walls, I could hide the decay from the world and maybe even from myself. I went out and bought 5 more of those mountain lake puzzles. I sat at this table for 10 hours straight without eating or drinking. I tried to force the pieces together with sheer anger. I told myself that if I could just solve one more, then the fog would lift, and my daughter would never have to know. But the more I pushed, the more the world blurred. I was trying to fix a software crash with a hammer. When Claire called to check on me, I sharpened my voice. I told her I was busy with complex calculations and that I did not have time for her small talk. I lied to her face because I was terrified she would see the cracks in my concrete. I thought I was protecting my dignity, but I was just isolating the infection. I even kept the memory of my late wife locked in a cold, dark box. I thought that feeling that grief or talking about the hole she left behind was a waste of cognitive resources. I told myself I needed that energy to survive. I did not realize that the high price of that silent stress was frying my neural connections from the inside out. I was holding my breath, thinking it would stop the building from burning. All I was doing was suffocating. I bet you are doing the same thing right now. You are hiding your lapses. You are pretending you just forgot your keys because you were distracted. You are pulling away from the people who love you because you do not want them to see you stumble. You think your isolation is a fortress of peace. It is not. It is a laboratory for your own disappearance. I spent months in that chair, waiting for my old self to return through willpower alone. But you cannot negotiate with a storm that you invited into the house. Every time I chose to stay quiet instead of speaking, I was cutting another wire. Every time I chose my pride over my daughter, I was handing more of my memory over to the void. I was trying to save my life by doing the very things that were ending it. I sat in that chair until the sun went down and the shadows swallowed the room. I looked at those scattered puzzle pieces on the table, and I finally saw them for what they were. They were not just bits of cardboard. They were pieces of my own identity that I had let drift away because I was too proud to ask for a hand. I had spent 40 years making sure my bridges did not sway in the wind. But I had forgotten that a human mind needs to sway and bend to stay alive. I realized then that my peace was actually a slow suicide. I was the one who turned off the lights. I was the one who locked the doors. I had treated my life like a finished project, when life is a construction site that never closes. The silence I cherished was just the sound of my brain dying, one connection at a time. I looked in the mirror, and I did not see a master engineer. I saw a man who had built a perfect tomb and climbed inside while his heart was still beating. That was the night I picked up the phone. My hand was shaking so hard I nearly dropped the handset. I called Claire, not to tell her I was fine or to give her some logical advice. I called her to tell her that I was lost. I had to kill the man I thought I was to save the small piece of myself that remained. I understood then that if I did not find the courage to be weak and the strength to learn something new, I was going to disappear into that fog and never come back. I had to stop protecting my pride and start fighting for my presence. It was the hardest calculation I ever had to make. I had to admit that my fortress of logic was a house of cards. I was not resting. I was rotting. And if I wanted to remember the name of my own daughter tomorrow, I had to start breaking every rule I had made for myself over the last 16 years. The comfort I had been chasing was the very thing that was erasing me. I finally understood that the friction of life is what keeps the gears turning. Without the struggle, there is no light. And my life had become very dark because I had refused to struggle. I had to learn how to live again, or I would be forgotten while I was still standing right here. I spent my life building highways of concrete and steel, and I thought my brain worked the same way. I believed that once a road was built, you just had to keep driving on it, and it would stay open forever. I was wrong. The first mistake I made was embracing a sterile routine. I woke up at the same time and ate the same toast and read the same section of the newspaper every single day for years. I thought I was being efficient, but I was actually building dead ends in my own mind. Your brain does not want comfort. Comfort is the anesthetic of decay. When you stop taking new paths and stop learning things that make your head hurt, you are telling your neurons that they are no longer needed. You think you are resting, but you are actually allowing the weeds to grow over the tracks. If you are doing exactly what you did yesterday, you are already losing ground. My second mistake was choosing solitude and calling it peace. I told myself I did not need the noise of other people or the weight of their problems. I stopped going to the club, and I stopped arguing about the world, and I stopped calling my old friends. I thought I was protecting my energy, but I was actually letting my social muscles turn to mush. A conversation is the most complex exercise your brain can perform. You have to listen and process and react and remember all at the same time. When I cut myself off from the world, I was shutting down the very areas of my brain that kept me sharp. Solitude is not a sanctuary. It is a vacuum that sucks the life out of your memory. Every time you decline an invitation or choose the silence of an empty house over the friction of a real conversation, you are handing a piece of your mind over to the fog. The third mistake was the one I kept hidden even from myself. I had a poor emotional diet. I carried the weight of my wife passing like a lead weight in a box, and I refused to look inside. I thought that by not feeling the pain, I was saving my strength to survive. I was wrong. Holding on to old grudges and unprocessed grief creates a silent, chronic stress that poisons your entire system. My doctor told me that the cortisol from that hidden pain was literally frying my neural connections. Your brain has a limited amount of energy. If you spend all of it maintaining the walls around your heart, you will have nothing left to remember where you put your keys or the name of the daughter who is standing right in front of you. You cannot afford the luxury of a heavy heart. It is too expensive for a mind that is trying to stay alive. I look at my daughter Claire now, and sometimes I still feel that cold shiver. I see her standing by the window, and for a split second, I have to scan the lines of her face to be absolutely sure it is her. That is the price of my pride. That is the cost of all those years I spent choosing the easy path and the silent room. I am telling you this because I can see you standing on that same shore. You think you have time. You think your mind is a permanent structure that will wait for you to decide to use it again. It is not. Every single day, you choose comfort over a challenge. You are handing a shovel to the fog. Every time you stay home because it is easier than talking to a friend, you are locking another door from the inside. Do not bury yourself alive before your time. I am an old engineer who forgot his own blueprints, and I am telling you that the decay is silent until it is deafening. You need to go out and do something that makes your head hurt today. Learn a new language, pick up an instrument, call that relative you have been avoiding, and have the hard conversation you have been running from for a decade. Break your routine until it cracks. If you do not use your mind to live right now, I promise you that this disease will use it to forget everything you ever loved. The clock is not ticking, it is fading. Take a stand. Change your life this afternoon while you still have the power to choose. Do it before the man in the mirror becomes a stranger you do not recognize anymore. Take action while you still know exactly who is looking back at you.